The air crackled with tension, as if the very atmosphere was charged with an unspoken anxiety. Trump had just left the podium, his words echoing in the hallowed halls of Congress, lingering like a ghostly presence. He spoke of American strength, of prosperity, of a nation triumphant. But something felt off, a dissonance between his words and the reality outside. A deep unease settled over many, a feeling that something was deeply, terribly wrong. It was as if the facade of triumph was cracking, revealing a more troubling truth beneath. Then, Bernie Sanders took the stage, his presence a stark contrast to the polished veneer of the previous speaker. A hush fell over the chamber as the senator from Vermont, his voice a gravelly rumble, offered a starkly different vision of America. His words were not just a speech, but a call to action. Gone were the gilded pronouncements, the self-congratulatory pats on the back. Instead, there was a raw, unvarnished truth that cut through the silence like a knife. In their place stood a raw, unvarnished truth, delivered with the fiery conviction of a man who had spent his life fighting for the common person. His words resonated deeply with those who felt left behind. This was not the America Trump had painted, not even close. This was an America where the cracks in the facade were all too visible. This was an America where millions struggled to make ends meet, where healthcare was a luxury, and where the promise of a decent life seemed increasingly out of reach. It was a stark reminder of the disparities that existed. This was the America Trump didn't want to talk about, the America he hoped you wouldn't notice. But it was impossible to ignore the growing divide. But Bernie Sanders was here to make sure you did. His message was clear. The fight for a fairer, more just America was far from over. Sanders didn't mince words. He accused Trump of constructing a parallel universe, a world built on lies, distortions, and outright fabrications. This wasn't just about policy disagreements, this was about the fundamental nature of truth. Trump, Sanders argued, had a dangerous habit of bending reality to fit his own narrative, whether it was about the 2020 election, the January 6th insurrection, or the very real threat of climate change. This big lie strategy, as Sanders called it, was more than just cynical politics, it was a direct assault on democracy itself. By undermining faith in facts and institutions, Trump had created a fertile ground for conspiracy theories and extremism. He had sown doubt and division, chipping away at the very foundations of American society. And the most insidious part? Millions of Americans bought it. They lived in this parallel universe, shielded from inconvenient truths by a wall of misinformation and propaganda. This, Sanders warned, was not a game. This was deadly serious. Trump's speech, Sanders pointed out, was notable for what it didn't say. It was a glaring omission that spoke volumes about the administration's priorities. In his nearly 90-minute address, the word poverty never crossed his lips. It was as if the plight of the poor was an inconvenient truth best left unspoken. Neither did healthcare, housing, or income inequality. These critical issues affecting millions were conspicuously absent from his narrative. It was as if the struggles of millions of ordinary Americans simply didn't exist. Their daily battles, their hardships were invisible in the grand vision being painted. Sanders, his voice filled with righteous anger, reminded everyone just who was missing from Trump's rosy picture. He brought to light the faces and stories that were being ignored. He spoke of the families forced to work 2 or 3 jobs just to put food on the table, families who were struggling to make ends meet despite their hard work, of the seniors who had to choose between medicine and rent, a heartbreaking choice that no one should have to make in a country as wealthy as ours, of the students drowning in student loan debt, burdened by the cost of education and the weight of their dreams. He spoke of an America where the middle class was shrinking, where the promise of upward mobility was fading, where the gap between the rich and poor was wider than ever, creating a society of haves and have-nots, and where the American dream was becoming a distant memory, a fading hope for many. This was the reality Trump ignored, the reality that was too inconvenient to address, the reality he couldn't afford to acknowledge. To do so would be to admit the failures of his policies, because to acknowledge it would be to admit that his policies, far from making America great again, were actually making it harder for ordinary people to survive. It was a stark reminder of the disconnect between political rhetoric and the lived experiences of millions. Trump's answer to these problems? More tax cuts for the wealthy, of course. The same tired old trickle-down economics that had been failing for decades. Sanders wasn't buying it. He called it what it was, a blatant giveaway to the rich and powerful, a cynical attempt to reward those who needed it least. He cited study after study showing that Trump's policies disproportionately benefited the wealthiest Americans, while doing little to help those struggling to make ends meet. He pointed to the proposed cuts to Medicaid, a lifeline for millions of low-income families, as proof that Trump's priorities were utterly out of touch with the needs of ordinary Americans. Trickle-down economics is a cruel joke, Sanders boomed, his voice echoing through the chamber. It's time we stop pretending it's anything else. Section 5. The robots are coming. Sanders then turned to a new threat on the horizon: automation. The rise of artificial intelligence and robotics, he warned, had the potential to displace millions of workers, from truck drivers to factory workers to even white-collar professionals. This wasn't some dystopian fantasy, he argued. It was already happening. He pointed to the recent layoff of thousands of federal employees, a move championed by Trump and his billionaire allies like Elon Musk. These layoffs, Sanders argued, were a taste of things to come, a harbinger of a future where corporations, driven by greed and a relentless pursuit of profit, would automate away millions of jobs. The solution, Sanders argued, wasn't to try to hold back the tide of progress, it was to prepare for it. He called for massive investments in education and job training, for a guaranteed basic income to ensure that everyone had a safety net, and for a fundamental rethinking of our relationship with work in the 21st century. But it wasn't all doom and gloom. Sanders also struck a note of hope, a call to action. He spoke passionately about the need to stand with Ukraine against Russian aggression, reminding everyone that the fight for democracy was a global one. He called for a renewed commitment to American leadership on the world stage, not through military might, but through diplomacy, cooperation, and a steadfast commitment to human rights. He reminded everyone that the challenges facing America, while daunting, were not insurmountable. He spoke of the power of hope, of the enduring strength of the human spirit, and of the countless ordinary people who were fighting every day for a better future. And then, he laid out his vision for that better future, a future that was not just a dream, but a tangible reality we could all work towards. It was a vision rooted in the belief that everyone, regardless of their race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation, deserved a fair shot at a decent life. This vision was about inclusivity and ensuring that no one was left behind in the pursuit of happiness and success. It was a vision that put people before profits, that valued compassion over greed, and that embraced the principles of justice and equality. It was about creating a society where the well-being of individuals was prioritized over corporate interests. He called for a radical overhaul of the campaign finance system, for an end to the corrupting influence of money in politics. This meant creating a political landscape where the voices of ordinary citizens were not drowned out by the wealthiest few. He demanded a $17 minimum wage, Medicare for all, and tuition-free college. These were not just policies but commitments to ensuring economic security and opportunities for all. He called for massive investments in renewable energy, affordable housing, and infrastructure. This was about building a sustainable future, one where our environment and communities could thrive together. He spoke of a future where healthcare was a right, not a privilege, where everyone had access to the medical care they needed without fear of financial ruin, where everyone had a roof over their head, a safe place to call home, and the security that comes with stable housing, and where all Americans could share in the nation's prosperity. This vision was about creating a fair economy where the benefits of growth were felt by everyone, not just the privileged few. It was an ambitious vision, to be sure, one that required bold action and unwavering commitment. But it was also a necessary one, a bold call for change that resonated with millions of Americans who were tired of the status quo. It was a vision that inspired hope and a sense of collective purpose, urging everyone to come together to build a better future. Bernie Sanders knew that none of this would be easy. He knew that the forces arrayed against change were powerful and entrenched. But he also knew something else. That real change never came from the top down, it always came from the bottom up. He reminded everyone of the great social movements of the past, from the civil rights movement to the labor movement to the women's suffrage movement. He spoke of the courage of ordinary people who stood up to injustice, who demanded better for themselves and their children, and who, against all odds, changed the course of history. He called on everyone who believed in a more just and equitable America to stand up, to speak out, and to fight back against the forces of greed and corruption. He urged them to organize, to mobilize, and to make their voices heard. He told them that the future of America was in their hands. Bernie Sanders' response to Trump's address was more than just a speech, it was a rallying cry. It was a stark reminder of the deep divisions that plagued American society, of the vast inequalities that continued to grow, and of the very real threats to democracy itself. But it was also a message of hope. It was a reminder that the fight for a better future was far from over, that the power to create change still rested in the hands of the people, and that, even in the darkest of times, the human spirit could not be extinguished. It was a call to action, a challenge to build a more just and equitable America for all. It was, in many ways, a battle for the very soul of America, and it was a battle that Bernie Sanders, as he had done his entire life, was determined to win.
So hit that subscribe button, ring the bell for notifications, and let's turn the page on a new adventure together. Get ready to experience books like never before, only on VBook 360. Like, comment, and share to support the channel and keep the video magic alive. Thank you for stopping by. And remember, every video has a story, and every story deserves to be shared. See you in the next video.